Welcome to the Compliance Officer's Playbook podcast. You brought us a high-stakes, high-dollar challenge today. We are undertaking a massive deep dive into the true economic drain of serious and organized crime in Australia. We're going to be looking specifically at the staggering figures published in the Australian Institute of Criminology's Statistical Report 55 for the 2023-24 financial year.
This report is absolutely essential reading. I mean, for anyone involved in compliance, security, or financial regulation, this is it. Because it moves beyond just, arrest statistics and puts a clear, colossal price tag on organized criminality.
Right.
So our goal today is to extract the crucial insights from these sources and to make sure you walk away not just with the numbers, but with a deep understanding of what they actually mean for the economy and for your practice.
Okay, so let's set the stage by defining the enemy here. When we talk about serious and organized crime, or SOC, we're not talking about petty theft, are we? How does the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission define this threat?
Well, the definition is crucial because it really informs the entire calculation. SOC is identified as calculated, sophisticated, and at its core, financially motivated offending.
Okay.
And the key elements are that it involves multiple offenders and it operates over an extended period of time. So this is a durable, professional, and really complex enterprise.
So it's a business, a criminal business.
It's exactly that. And this distinction is what allows the AIC to accurately attribute costs to these highly structured groups rather than just to general crime.
And the size of this enterprise is something we have to put right up front because it demands immediate attention. When we talk about the economic cost of SOC to the Australian economy in 2023-24, the figures range, but the upper estimate, the most comprehensive one, it's a stunning $82.3 billion.
That figure is staggering on its own. It really is. But context is everything for a number this big. That high estimate, the $82.3 billion, it represents 3.2% of Australia's gross domestic product.
3.2%.
To help you visualize that, imagine 3 cents out of every single dollar earned in the entire country is being siphoned off, destroyed, or just spent fighting this criminal element.
And what's fascinating here is the trend. I mean, we saw an estimate of $68.7 billion just the year before. That's a sharp increase. Is organized crime activity growing that fast? Or were we simply getting better at counting it?
It's a combination of both, but the AIC is very transparent here. They say a large portion of that jump is attributable to methodological rigor.
Right, so better counting.
Exactly. It's not that they were guessing wildly before, but they've implemented significant improvements. They've used better, more recent data sets. Specifically, they've refined their calculations around consequential crime, the crimes that flow from SOC activities, and they've updated private sector cybersecurity spending. And that gives us a much more accurate and inevitably higher snapshot of the true cost.
So our mission today is to surgically dissect this $82.3 billion monster. We're going to break down how the AIC structures this cost using their 3 major pillars. Let's unpack those pillars now because they really define the structure of this economic drain.
Certainly. And understanding this 3-part categorization is the key to absorbing the rest of this report. First, we have the direct costs, which the AIC estimates are up to $47.9 billion.
47.9, okay.
These are the costs associated with the primary profit-generating criminal activities themselves. This is where SOC makes its money. Illicit drug trafficking, complex financial fraud, pure cybercrime. It's the cost of the crime itself.
So the black market economy, essentially,
Right.
And that's the largest share by a long shot.
Precisely. Second, there are the consequential costs, which are estimated up to $10.9 billion. Now, this is the cost of conventional crimes committed as a result of SOC markets.
The ripple effects.
The devastating ripple effects. A compliance officer needs to track this because it shows the systemic failure. We're talking about the violence from market disputes or the huge volume of burglaries committed by drug users trying to fund their habits where the drugs were supplied by these SOC groups.
Radiating out into the community.
Exactly. And the third pillar is indirect costs, which hit $23.4 billion. This is the cost of defense and response. It's the money spent by the public sector, police, courts, regulators, and the private sector, so businesses and individuals spending on prevention, cybersecurity, and compliance. It is the cost of constantly trying to build a wall against this threat.
That breakdown makes the scale so much clearer. So we're looking at nearly $59 billion lost directly to crime and its immediate consequences, and then another $23.4 billion just trying to stop it.
And we have to emphasize the estimation approach here. It's rigorous. The AIC doesn't just give one number. They provide low, medium, and high estimates. This is based on the assumed degree of SOC involvement in each crime type. For something like cocaine trafficking, they assign 100% SOC involvement.
Because it's so complex and transnational.
Right. But for other things like maybe cannabis markets or certain identity crimes, that percentage is lower. That level of measured attribution is why this report holds so much weight.
It's an educated, evidence-based model. Now, for the transparency note we promised for you, the learner, even with this precision, the AIC explicitly states that the $82.3 billion figure is still a conservative underestimate.
Absolutely. This is the floor, not the ceiling. The report acknowledges severe limitations in quantifying costs for certain categories. They mention things like firearms trafficking, sophisticated corruption, environmental crime areas where data is really scarce. This forces them to assign low confidence ratings to those specific estimates.
So if we could actually measure those black holes in the data, that 82 billion would climb even higher.
Significantly higher, no question.
Okay, let's jump into the core engine of this crime economy. The direct, serious, and organized crime costs topping out at $47.9 billion. We have to start with the biggest single line item, which is illicit drug activity.
Illicit drugs are, without a doubt, the single largest financial driver. They cost Australia up to $19.0 billion in 2023-24. That is just shy of 40%, 39.5% of the entire direct cost of organized crime. If you want to stop the cash flow, this is where you have to focus.
We need to go beyond that 19 billion figure and dissect how it's calculated. What specific cost components are generating this massive figure?
The AIC breaks it into three main elements. First, you have the measurable medical costs, hospital admissions, treatments, that kind of thing, which came to about $1.56 billion. Second, there are the costs of lost output, hitting $6.46 billion. This includes productivity loss due to illness, incarceration, or premature death related to drug use.
A cost that employers and the government end up bearing.
Exactly. And the third component is the most telling. It is. The single largest component is the actual expenditure on illicit drugs lost to the economy, which reached $10.93 billion at the high estimate. This is the money that moves directly from consumers to organized crime groups, entirely outside the legal economy. It gets laundered or exported, and it represents a pure loss to domestic GDP.
And this is where it gets really interesting, connecting supply and demand. The National Wastewater Drug Monitoring Program showed a dramatic consumption surge. What did the report find?
The finding was a 34% overall increase in consumption across the four major drug classes. But the spikes in specific drugs are alarming. Cocaine use was up 69%, MDMA up 49%, and methamphetamine use saw a 21% rise. This isn't marginal growth, this is a massive escalation.
And this leads to a disturbing economic paradox, which really confirms the profit model for these SOC groups. That surge in consumption happened at the same time as a significant decrease in the price of these drugs on the street.
That's the core insight for a compliance professional. The report references existing research linking lower prices to increased consumption. It's basic economics, really. Organized crime groups are clearly achieving efficiencies of scale, likely through high-volume importation and refined supply chains. This lets them lower the unit cost, drive higher addict numbers, and ultimately maximize their total market revenue. They prioritize volume over margin.
And the total street value consumed was nearly $12 billion that year. It just shows the sheer economic power they wield.
It's immense. And to confirm the link to organized crime, the AIC used incredibly high involvement estimates in their calculation. This is not a general street crime issue. They applied 100% SOC involvement in the cocaine and heroin markets, 95% for MDMA, 90% for meth, and 60% for cannabis. They are defining this $19 billion market as almost entirely controlled by sophisticated criminal enterprises.
Okay, let's pivot to the next major financial driver, which targets the very structure of our economy. Organized financial crime, contributing $13.2 billion. This is where SOC groups use sophistication, not just brute force.
Right. This accounts for about 28% of the total direct costs. It's the hidden tax on every legitimate business. And the biggest slice of that is tax and revenue crime, which is $9.1 billion on the high estimate.
That includes complex things like offshore tax evasion. But a major focus in the report, and one compliance officers really need to understand, is illegal Phoenix activity.
Illegal Phoenix activity is economic warfare waged by organized crime. It's a mechanism where new companies are rapidly set up to continue the business of old ones that have been intentionally liquidated.
Phoenix.
Exactly. Phoenix, specifically to evade creditors, employee entitlements, and, critically, government taxes.
So the criminal entity just extracts all the value from the old company, discards the debt, and continues trading under a new corporate shell.
Precisely. The source material notes the estimated median direct cost to the Australian economy from this activity alone is over $5 billion in 2024-25 values. The victims are vast: legitimate creditors, former employees who lose their entitlements, and of course the government losing massive sums in unpaid taxes.
And speaking of entitlements, let's look at superannuation fraud hitting $2.7 billion. I mean, Australia's superannuation assets are in the trillions, so the vulnerability must be immense.
It is a colossal liquid target. As of June 2024, the super industry managed $3.9 trillion in assets. The AIC got their estimate by applying a loss rate of 0.14% of total assets, which gives you that $2.73 billion high estimate from organized crime fraud. For compliance teams in super, that figure has to be an urgent signal to review their anti-fraud frameworks, particularly around identity verification.
Let's move on to transaction fraud. We saw the total value of fraudulent transactions increase by over 23%, reaching nearly $1 billion. How does the AIC separate out simple card fraud from the organized crime component?
They separate them meticulously. Standard payment fraud, like card data theft, contributed about $574 million. But the real complexity comes in the other categories, like electronic funds transfer interception, which hit $864 million. SOC involvement here is calculated at between 60 and 95%, directly linking the most sophisticated forms of digital theft back to these groups.
So we've covered $19 billion in drugs and $13.2 billion in complex financial attacks. Now we move to the rest of the physical market, the illicit commodities other than drugs costing $8.6 billion. The major headline here is illicit tobacco.
Illicit tobacco cost the country $4 billion at the high estimate, and the trend here is just terrifying. This represents a fourfold increase in costs since 2020-21, when the estimate was only $1 billion. This explosive growth is a direct result of government taxation policies creating an extremely lucrative black market for organized crime to exploit.
And what drives that $4 billion cost? Is it mainly health costs or lost revenue?
It is overwhelmingly revenue loss. The cost breakdown shows $3.3 billion is entirely lost tax revenue. The rest, about $690 million, covers health and social cost treatment, lost productivity, all associated with unregulated tobacco.
And this is where we need to spend a moment on a crucial detail that makes this $4 billion estimate potentially misleading: the vaping caveat. The AIC explicitly notes this estimate completely excludes the rapidly expanding market for illicit vapes and e-cigarettes.
This exclusion is so important for you to understand because it tells us where the next major financial threat is building. Authorities have already seized over 10 million illicit vaping products since the import ban in July 2024.
10 million.
10 million. The supply chain for these vapes smuggled in sea cargo, distributed through criminal networks. It mirrors the illicit tobacco structure. The scale suggests that if that market were fully quantified, the total illicit commodity loss would soar past that $8.6 billion mark. SOC groups are just diversifying their portfolio.
Let's shift to intellectual property crime, hitting $3.2 billion. This covers everything from counterfeit goods to digital piracy. How do they measure the economic loss here?
They calculate this using industry benchmarks. They start with Australia's estimated copyright trade value, a massive $171.7 billion for the year. They then apply the assumed global counterfeit trade rate, about 2.9%, to get a total market loss of over $12.9 billion.
But the final figure is only $3.2 billion. Why the reduction?
Because the AIC attributes only 25% of that total loss to serious and organized crime involvement. A lot of piracy is done by individuals, but the mass production and distribution of counterfeit goods or large-scale digital theft are explicitly linked to SOC enterprises. That's where the $3.2 billion comes from.
Now to environmental crime, $1.4 billion, which has a notorious lack of hard data.
This category has a low confidence rating, and for good reason. It's hard to trace. However, the AIC flags it as globally the fourth most costly transnational organized crime category. The estimate is calculated by taking global estimates for things like illegal wildlife trade and waste crime and adjusting them for Australia's GDP. It's a necessary attempt, but it almost certainly overlooks the enormous long-term ecological and remediation costs.
And finally, firearms trafficking, listed at a strikingly conservative $10.8 million. This number seems wildly insufficient.
The conservatism is intentional, and it really highlights a major data failure in the report. The AIC only calculated this figure based on the lost investment value of the estimated $430 million illicit firearm market. They are not calculating the cost of the violence, the fear, or the law enforcement effort those 200,000 illicit firearms enable. If they did, this number would soar.
That really emphasizes that sometimes the smallest numbers can point to the biggest threats where data is failing.
Exactly.
Let's move to pure digital loss.
Yeah.
Pure cybercrime costing $4.5 billion. We need to clearly separate this from the financial fraud we discussed earlier.
This is critical. Pure cybercrime refers only to activities that are intrinsically digital. Hacking, malware, denial of service attacks. We've already counted the financial losses from payment fraud. This $4.5 billion is about data theft, business disruption, and the cost of remediation.
And focusing on individuals, what did the report find regarding victimization?
The total estimated net loss for individuals was about $2.7 billion. What stands out is the surge in malware victimization. It jumped from 14% in prior surveys to 19% in this reporting period. That shows a clear escalation in organized groups targeting private citizens.
And for businesses, the cost is around $2.8 billion. For our compliance audience, does the size of the business matter?
The loss profile varies dramatically, which is crucial for risk management. While micro businesses had the largest number of incidents, their average loss was around $30,000. In contrast, large businesses faced average losses of over $63,000 per incident. So SOC groups target small businesses for volume, but large ones for higher yield.
And finally, the cost to government from pure cybercrime incidents is estimated at $955 million. What's the hidden factor there?
The AIC applied a global adjustment. They referenced IBM data showing that globally, the average cost per incident to the public sector is often 43% lower than the overall average. So they adjusted the average cost for government incidents to account for that difference.
Okay, if we connect this all together, all of this criminal activity, drugs, fraud, data theft, it requires support staff, logistics, protection. That brings us to the crime enablers, costing $1.5 billion.
These are the secondary activities that allow that $46 billion in primary profit to flow securely. They are the mechanisms that buy opacity and protection for the enterprise. We're talking identity crime, corruption, money laundering, and specific acts of violence.
Identity crime is the largest enabler here, at $775 million. This is the acquisition and sale of personal data to facilitate all the other crimes we've discussed.
That's right. And once the AIC established the full pool of identity crime loss, they applied a high estimate of 60% SOC involvement. This shows the bulk of identity theft isn't random, it's industrial scale, designed to fuel other major criminal revenue streams.
Let's talk about money laundering, estimated at $586.2 million. This is just the cost of concealing the money. This calculation is incredibly specific and needs careful explanation.
This is where we deliver a key insight for the compliance officer. The total proceeds of crime generated across all SOC activity was estimated at almost $38 billion. Now, they could have just counted all that as a loss, but that would be double counting. Instead, they focused on the cost of the service required to make that money opaque.
So how is that $586 million figure reached?
It's calculated strictly on the commissions paid to professional money laundering facilitators. The AIC estimated that a quarter of that $38 billion pool requires professional help. Those launderers typically charge an estimated 6.5% commission for their service. That commission, the $586 million, is the calculated loss to the economy for the service of cleaning the money.
That is a staggering figure. It represents the size of a black market professional services industry.
It raises a profound question for our audience. Is the $244 million spent on AML compliance sufficient to combat a criminal service industry that generates over $500 million in pure commission?
Moving to corruption, only $124 million. Given how much damage corruption can do, why is this number so surprisingly small?
This is another data failure point, and the AIC flags it with a low confidence rating. This number is based on global fraud data applied to a small number of estimated cases in Australia. It's a vast underestimate because it fails to capture the non-financial costs. misallocated resources, damage to regulatory integrity, loss of public trust.
And finally, violence as an enabler at just $2 million.
Again, we have to define this precisely. This is only the cost of violence, kidnapping, extortion when used directly to support the criminal enterprise. It's the cost of violence used in turf wars. Violence that results from drug use is counted in our next, much larger section.
That takes us seamlessly into consequential organized crime costs, the ripple effect that hits the community, totaling up to $10.9 billion. And this is where that methodological upgrade you mentioned provides some vital new clarity.
This is a major improvement in the science of measuring crime costs. Historically, linking SOC activity like drug supply to conventional crime like burglary was based on general correlation. But the AIC used new recent data on the self-reported attribution of offenses to illicit drug use among police detainees.
So instead of just saying drug crime is high and property crime is high, they can establish a more direct user-reported link between the SOC-supplied drug and the crime committed to fund it.
Exactly. They move much closer to causation. And the source data provides an explosive insight into the true downstream harm of the illicit drug market. We see shockingly high attribution rates. For example, 41.7% of homicide-related offenses were attributed to illicit drug use.
Over 40% of homicides are connected to the drug market. That's a figure that should change police and government funding priorities instantly.
The numbers are just as powerful for property crime. The data shows that 48.3% of burglary-related offenses and 36.8% of theft-related offenses were attributed specifically to methamphetamine use. This methodology allows the AIC to accurately calculate that $10.9 billion cost of harm.
And where is that cost concentrated?
It's highly concentrated in property crime driven by addiction. Burglary alone accounts for the largest share, contributing $4.38 billion to the high estimate. Vehicle theft is another massive contributor at $1.3 billion. The drugs supplied by SOC groups are fueling the crime needed to finance the addiction.
The AIC includes a very disturbing case study in the report, illustrating how these market disputes, especially in the booming illicit tobacco trade, spill over into extreme violence.
The source material detailed that the turf wars around illicit tobacco led to over 200 targeted arson attacks since January 2023. These aren't just minor incidents, they are calculated, destructive acts of economic intimidation.
And the tragic consequence cited was the death of an unrelated Melbourne woman in January 2025 during a firebombing of the wrong residential address.
That anecdote makes it chillingly clear that when organized crime scales up its markets, be it drugs or tobacco, the violence is not contained. It directly impacts innocent bystanders.
One final important link here. The source material also calculated the proceeds generated from these consequential crimes. These crimes, which cost the community $10.9 billion, also generate funds for SOC.
They absolutely do. The theft and burglary committed to fund drug purchases still generate massive funds that are immediately fed back into the criminal cycle. This is estimated at $468.3 million. So the system is self-perpetuating, using the victims of its products to fund its continuing operations.
Okay, we've covered the primary profit engine and the community harm. Now we move to the final pillar. Indirect costs, prevention and response, reaching up to $23.4 billion. This is the societal cost of defense, the money that has to be diverted from public good.
And this concept of opportunity cost is crucial. The AIC reminds us that every dollar spent here, whether by police or by a business on a firewall, is a dollar that cannot be directed towards healthcare, education, or infrastructure. It's a necessary financial burden that slows legitimate economic growth.
Let's start with the public sector costs. $10.8 billion high estimate. This covers the entire governmental apparatus trying to fight SOC.
This figure is carefully attributed. The AIC takes the total budget of entities like the AFP and state police and calculates the proportion allocated to SOC activity. For example, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission is 100% crime-related, and its SOC involvement is estimated at 100%. But for general state police, they attribute a much lower percentage of their budget to complex SOC activities. This ensures the $10.8 billion is a targeted measure.
That brings us to the private sector and other costs, a huge expense at $12.7 billion. Where is the commercial spending focused?
Cybersecurity expenditure absolutely dominates this entire pillar, hitting $9.9 billion at the high estimate. It's the single largest component of private sector cost.
For our compliance audience, the methodology used to calculate this nearly $10 billion figure is highly relevant. How did they get there?
They used industry benchmarks based on operational budgets. The calculation starts with data showing companies typically allocate about 2.6% of their operational budgets to IT. And of that IT budget, the median allocation specifically to cybersecurity is 7%. They then applied these proportions across the total operating expenditures of Australian businesses.
Beyond digital security, what other compliance and response costs are companies absorbing?
We see substantial spending on traditional physical security private guards, patrols totaling $840 million. But let's focus on the regulatory burden for the financial sector. Financial services compliance estimated at $244.7 million.
This compliance figure directly addresses AML/CTF legislation. What specific burdens does this cost measure?
That $244 million includes the annual costs for regulated entities to comply with Know Your Customer requirements, including infrastructure and personnel. It also includes the annual AUSTRAC industry contribution levy. And crucially, the AIC determined that 60% of these regulatory costs are directly attributable to the challenge posed by organized crime.
Again, we have to contrast this. The private sector spends $244 million on AML compliance to prevent money laundering. Yet SOC groups are spending $586 million just on the commissions to perform the laundering. This suggests the compliance effort is vastly outgunned.
It raises the urgent question of effectiveness. The scale of the threat demands a proportionate response, and the money available for laundering suggests that current measures, while costly, are not sufficient to fundamentally disrupt the flow.
Finally, we see costs hitting individuals directly, with household precautions totaling $922 million. This is the cost of living under the shadow of crime.
This is perhaps the most visceral cost. It's the calculation of time spent by individuals on simple precautionary behaviors, like locking doors and checking windows. Previous research estimated the average person spends about 4 minutes per day on these simple safety tasks. When you apply the cost of that time to the entire population, it generates nearly $1 billion.
4 minutes a day, multiplied by the entire population, costing nearly $1 billion. That powerfully illustrates that organized crime doesn't just hit the corporate bottom line, it adds friction to every single Australian's daily life.
And we wrap this pillar up with costs for insurance administration for theft claims and private sector support for victims of violent crime. These are the final cleanup costs that the private sector is forced to absorb.
Okay, let's bring this home and look at the whole picture. We've dissected the direct costs, the consequential costs, and the indirect response costs.
That brings us back to the final massive figure, $82.3 billion for 2023-24.
And when we look at the trend over time, the cost of SOC has increased by 73.6% since 2016-17. That's an average of 10.5% annual increase. This threat is growing much faster than the economy itself.
And what's fascinating is that despite all the methodological improvements, the AIC concludes that this is still likely an underestimate of the true losses.
The black holes remain: illicit vapes, most forms of corruption, the real social cost of firearms, areas where the data just isn't there.
This raises the final provocative challenge issued by the AIC. The path forward demands the urgent need to update the estimated proportion of SOC involvement in various crimes based on contemporary data. If we are to deploy public funds and direct private compliance efforts effectively, we need the numbers to accurately reflect the constantly evolving reality of the organized crime environment.
So the $82.3 billion is merely the highly measured floor, not the ceiling. The organized crime economy is evolving faster than our data collection methods.
That is the essential takeaway. Organized crime is not a static threat. It's a dynamic, financially optimized business model, and our response has to be equally agile.
That was an absolutely critical and incredibly detailed deep dive into the costs of organized crime in Australia, leveraging the insights from the AIC report. Thank you for walking us through that complex data set, and thank you for joining this deep dive. If you appreciated the clarity, the insights, and the value we deliver today, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. You can become a paid subscriber today for $5 USD, and get full access to all premium deep dives packed with insights, stories, and value you won't find anywhere else. The link is in the show notes. Subscribe today.